She thought the quiet guy in the hostel was just a backpacker, until he showed up with a helicopter and a ring. "Dad, I'm not coming home yet. I need to find something real." Anna's voice cracked as she pressed her phone tighter to her ear, standing just outside the arrivals terminal at Zurich Airport. Her blonde hair was pulled into a loose braid, a travel-worn backpack slung over one shoulder. On the other end of the line, silence. "You don't have to understand," she added more quietly. I can't go back to pretending." She ended the call before she lost her nerve. Her fingers were still trembling as she flagged the next train heading to Interlaken. It had been 4 days since she called off the wedding. 4 days since she looked at the man she was supposed to marry and realized that he never really saw her, not the way she wanted to be seen. That night, she'd packed everything and booked a one-way flight to Switzerland. No itinerary, no plans. Just her and the hope that maybe, far from everything, she could start over. By late afternoon, she stood outside a tiny alpine hostel tucked between white-capped mountains. It looked like something out of a snow globe, wooden shutters, ivy crawling up its side, and a little red sign that simply read, "Wander House." She checked in, took a hot shower, and wandered into the communal kitchen in search of tea. That's when she saw him. He was seated alone at the corner table near the frosted window, a knit beanie pulled low over dark curls, sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the cold, a battered brown notebook open in front of him. He wasn't eating, just writing, occasionally pausing to look out at the falling snow, as if waiting for it to say something he'd missed, though she didn't know his name yet, not then. All she knew was that his presence quieted the noise in her head. The hostel was full of movement, college kids on ski trips, retirees chasing postcard views, solo wanderers like her trying to outrun something. But Luke didn't fit any mold. He never joined the group dinners, never drank by the fire pit. Yet he wasn't unfriendly. He simply observed. Over the next 3 days, they shared the same space without exchanging more than a few polite words. She noticed how he always helped wash dishes, even if he hadn't eaten, how he refilled the kettle when it emptied, how he'd leave behind a folded napkin with a small doodle or quote for the next person who used the table. Always anonymous, always quiet. Anna tried not to be curious, but something about him pulled at the threads of her unraveling heart. On the 4th evening, she stepped outside after dinner. The snow had begun again, light, slow, like feathers falling from the sky. She walked to the edge of the small garden behind the hostel, where the trees met the open night, and sat on the stone bench, dusted in white. That's when she saw him. Luke stood about 10 feet away, coat open, head tilted to the sky as snow landed gently on his lashes. He didn't move, just breathed, like the forest had become a chapel and the snowfall a prayer. She watched him, silent. Then, as if he felt her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just gave a slow, respectful nod, and something in Anna, something tired and afraid and hopeful, nodded back. She didn't know yet that the man with the notebook had already written about her. Didn't know. He saw how she tucked her hands into her sleeves when she was nervous, how she offered her seat to an elderly tourist in the lounge without a second thought, how her laugh, though rare, sounded like bells breaking winter silence. But in that moment, beneath the falling snow, without a single word, they saw something in each other, something real. Anna noticed it first in the little things. Every morning, Luke brewed coffee before most of the hostels stirred awake, filling the kitchen with the warm, earthy scent that seemed to wrap around the old wood beams like a comforting embrace. He never said much, just a quiet nod if their eyes met, then back to his notebook, where he scribbled with the same intent as someone writing the last letter of their life. Anna tried, a few times, to start conversation. A comment about the snow, a joke about the crowded hostel fridge. Luke would answer short, polite replies, but the moment her words stretched longer than necessary, his gaze would drop, and his hand would return to his pen like a safety net. She could have let it go, but then she fell. It was her second attempt at skiing. She had taken a beginner's trail, too confident after one successful morning. She hit a patch of ice, tumbled hard, and twisted her ankle just enough to leave her limping back to the hostel, pride bruised and skin scraped raw. That night she sat on her bed with a cold compress when a knock came at the door. No voice. No footsteps down the hall. She opened it to find a small metal thermos, steam still rising from its spout. A post-it stuck to the side in tidy handwriting. Add honey if you want, or drink it stubborn. No signature. But she knew. From that moment, something shifted. The next evening, Anna offered to help clean the kitchen after dinner. Luke was already there, sleeves rolled up, wiping down the long wooden counter. She joined him in silence, passing plates and stacking bowls. It was the first time they stood shoulder to shoulder, without the heavy quiet pressing between them. "Do you like Swiss roasty?" he asked suddenly, not looking up. Anna blinked. "I don't know. Never had it. I'll show you." He moved with confidence, pulling out potatoes, cheese, herbs. She watched his hands, steady, sure, gentle. When he showed her how to grate without nicking her knuckles, he didn't touch her hand but mimicked the motion slowly beside her. And when she added too much salt, he smiled faintly, not teasing, just amused. He never asked her about her past, never pried, but somehow he remembered. He remembered that she liked her tea unsweetened, that she ate her bread crust first, that she paused when reading signposts, mouthing foreign words like tasting a new fruit. One evening she sat outside under the fairy lights teaching a small group of local children basic English phrases. She used gestures, rhymes, made animal sounds to get them to laugh. They adored her. And when the last child was picked up, she leaned back, cheeks flushed, wind pulling loose strands from her braid. She turned to see Luke watching from the kitchen window, his expression softer than she had ever seen. He didn't wave, didn't move, but for the first time he smiled, truly smiled, and it hit her like the first warm breeze after a long winter. Later that night she found a plate waiting for her on the long kitchen table, a slice of warm apple tart. Next to it, folded neatly, was a square of paper torn from a notebook. In his careful script, it read, "You teach them like someone once taught you." Anna stared at it, her heart suddenly loud in her chest. This was not the message of a passing stranger. This was someone who saw her, not just the surface, but the roots she rarely let show. She picked up the note, her fingers trembling slightly, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was drifting. She felt known. The hostel felt different that morning. The usual hum of backpackers making coffee and shuffling maps was quieter. The air had a strange stillness to it, like the world was holding its breath. Anna stepped into the kitchen, expecting to see Luke at his usual spot by the window, scribbling in that old notebook he never let out of his sight. But his chair was empty. His coffee mug, usually there beside him, had been washed and put away. She frowned, glanced around, then checked the front desk. No one had seen him leave. No bags were left behind, no note, just absence. Back in the kitchen, she noticed something on the table. A small, weathered notebook, the very one he always kept close, the edges soft from years of turning. She hesitated. It felt like crossing into someone else's thoughts, but something in her chest nudged her forward. Her fingers curled around the worn cover, and she slowly opened it. The first page was blank, the second too. But on the third page, her name. Not written directly, but she knew it was about her. The entry began. She walked into the hostel like she had just walked away from something that broke her. But she smiled at the snow, and that was enough for me to know she hadn't given up on beauty. Anna blinked, her heart kicking hard. She flipped to the next page. She hums when she washes dishes. Little melodies I do not recognize, but they stay in my head after she leaves. And then another. She talks to children like they are worth listening to. I do not remember anyone ever doing that for me. But she does it without trying. Page after page, Luke's voice filled the kitchen. Descriptions so detailed, so intimate, she felt like she was looking at herself through a mirror she had never seen before. Her laugh, her tea habits, the way she licked her thumb to turn pages. Tiny things. Things no one should have noticed, but he had. And then, near the end, written with a trembling hand, I thought love was something I had buried with her. But this girl, She made the silence inside me less terrifying. If I ever find the courage to love again, it would be her. Anna's breath caught. She closed the notebook, holding it to her chest. The kitchen was empty, cold, still smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon from the night before, but now it felt hollow. She sat down in Luke's usual chair, the notebook still in her hands, and stared out the window. Snow was falling again, quiet, slow flakes that danced in the morning light. He was gone. No warning, no goodbye. Just pages full of everything he had not dared say aloud. She pressed her fingers against her lips, remembering the way he had handed her warm tea, the way his eyes had softened watching her teach, the way he had always stood close. Something inside her cracked, not with grief, but with a kind of yearning she had not expected. He had seen her, truly seen her, and now he was gone. She sat there long after the other travelers had come and gone, her thumb brushing over the edge of the last written page. The silence he left behind was louder than anything he had ever spoken. Anna left the hostel, with her backpack slung across one shoulder and the notebook clutched tightly in her hand. The pages felt heavier than paper should, like they carried the weight of something unspoken, something sacred. She did not know where she was going next. Interlaken had been meant to be a stopover, a pause in a long string of aimless wandering after the collapse of the life she thought she wanted. But now, it was more. It had become a place where something had stirred inside her, a place where her heart had cracked open, just enough to let the cold in, and something warm fight back. Every path she walked reminded her of him. The snowy hill where they once stood in silence, watching local children build snowmen, their laughter bouncing off the trees. He had not said a word that day, just stood beside her, offering the stillness of his presence, as if that were enough. The tiny bakery tucked between the alleyways, where she once forgot her wallet and turned red with embarrassment, only to find, minutes later, the coffee already paid for. She had never seen him do it, but she knew it had been him. The lakeside bench where he sat in the mornings, notebook open, pen moving like the world was made of ink and memory. He never spoke unless spoken to, but she always felt seen, not watched, just noticed. Anna tried to shake the memories. She told herself it had been just a moment, just a passing connection between two people whose lives had briefly crossed in a snow-covered corner of the world. It meant nothing, but her heart knew better. Late one night, wrapped in a blanket and watching snow fall outside the train station, she gave in. She picked up her phone and typed a message to the hostel's manager. "Do you remember Luke? The guy with the backpack and the notebook? Do you know anything about him?" She did not expect a response, but in the morning her phone buzzed. Quiet guy, right? Always cleaned up after himself. Left the place spotless. Only thing I found after he left was a receipt. Said he made a call from our desk phone to a hospital in New York. Anna's breath caught. Her fingers went cold. It was a thread, a beginning. She followed it. She spent the day in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Lucerne, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold beside her laptop. She searched every variation she could think of. Hospital directories, foundation websites, press releases, even obituary pages. Nothing, until suddenly, everything. Luke Harrison. She stared at the name. Heir to the Harrison Medical Group. Son of Dr. Elliot Harrison, world-renowned neurosurgeon. Luke himself had once been a rising figure in the public health world, until 3 years ago, when his fiancée, Rachel Mendez, died in a car crash on the way to a gala. He had been waiting for her at the venue. She never arrived. After that, Luke vanished from public life. No statements, no photos, nothing. Until now, Anna sat frozen, notebook still resting on the cafe table like it knew more than she did. The man she had laughed with over misburnt toast and dish soap battles had been holding grief so deep it drowned his words. And yet, he had written about her. In that notebook, he had dared to capture her laugh, her stubbornness, her quiet acts of kindness to children who barely knew English. He had called her the first light he had seen in years. And then he had left, not out of cruelty, but fear, because he had loved before and lost, and somewhere between the snow and the silence, she had made him remember what it felt like to care again. Anna's hands trembled as she held the notebook. This was not just about romance. This was about trust, about healing, about two people who had run from pain and somehow collided into something fragile and rare. Luke had given her more than his words. He had given her a choice, and now it was her turn to choose whether she would let that gift slip through her fingers or chase down the man who had once believed in forever and was quietly asking if maybe, just maybe, it could still exist. The snow fell lightly that morning, just enough to kiss the tips of Anna's boots as she sat on a quiet hill outside the village. The air was still, the kind that held its breath before something changed. She had her notebook open in her lap, the one she had begun the day Luke disappeared. The pages were filling slowly, mostly with questions she had not found the courage to say aloud. Why did he leave? Why did he write about me? And why did it feel like he had taken something of mine with him? Something I had not known I needed until it was gone. She was halfway through a sentence when her phone buzzed beside her. One message, no number. It said only 2 words, "Look up." Anna blinked, her heart immediately thudding. She lifted her gaze, squinting into the white sky. At first, she saw nothing. Then, the distant thump of rotor blades. The clouds parted slightly, and a small, sleek helicopter emerged, slicing through the snow-dusted air. It circled once, then slowly descended toward the open stretch of field beside the hill. Anna stood slowly, breath caught in her throat, the wind from the landing blades whipping her hair across her face. The door opened, and there he was. No backpack, no notebook, no shadows under his eyes. Just Luke. He stepped out, dressed not in worn jeans and hiking boots, but a tailored black coat, dusted lightly with snow. In his right hand, a small velvet box. Anna stood frozen, the journal still clutched in her hands. He approached, his step steady, not hurried, as if he had rehearsed every movement in his mind 1,000 times. When he reached her, he stopped. The silence was thick with memory, with all the things they had not said and all the things that still could be said. Luke's voice broke the stillness. "I lost her because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid to love again. Afraid that if I let anyone in, I'd lose them too." He took a slow breath, eyes never leaving hers. "But then I met you, and it was quiet. It was never loud, never fast, but it was real." He lowered himself onto one knee in the snow. Anna gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Luke opened the box. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, was a simple ring. No diamond, just a smooth silver band engraved with one line from the notebook. The world got softer when she smiled. "I came back," he said, "because I'm not afraid anymore. I don't want the version of life I thought I had to live. I want the one that finds me in hostels and snowstorms. I want the one with you." He paused. "Will you let this be our real story?" Anna's eyes blurred with tears. She looked at him, not the heir to a medical empire, not the man who had once vanished, but the boy who had quietly watched her teach children, who had left hot tea by her door, who had seen her in a way no one else had. She knelt, too, and whispered, "I was waiting for you to come back, not for the ring, just for you." Luke smiled, his eyes bright, his shoulders finally unburdened. They stood together in the snow, the box now closed between them, not as a promise of forever, but as a sign they were ready to begin. Not a new chapter, but the first one written with both their hands. 2 months later, the snow had melted just enough to reveal wildflowers scattered across the green hills. The sky above was clear and unbroken, a vast, crisp blue that seemed to stretch forever, framing the jagged ridges of the Swiss Alps like a silent cathedral. There was no golden aisle, no chandeliers, no champagne flutes, only the wind rustling through the pine trees and a quiet clearing high up the mountain where Anna and Luke stood, hand in hand. Anna wore no wedding dress, just a soft ivory sweater, a wool skirt that fluttered around her knees and hiking boots laced with silver ribbon that she had threaded herself that morning. Her golden hair was braided loosely, dotted with tiny white blossoms picked by the children she had once taught during her time in the village. There was no veil, no jewels, no bouquet to throw, but there was light in her eyes that no diamond could match. Luke stood beside her, not in a tuxedo but in well-worn boots and a navy blazer that fit him like memory. His white shirt was open at the collar, and around his neck, tied slightly crooked, was a tie given to him by one of the hostel kids, blue and frayed at the edge. He wore it like a crown. The ceremony was as unpolished as it was perfect. There were no flower arrangements or calligraphy signs, only a circle of children holding daisies, a few friends from the hostel, and Mr. Klaus, the hostel manager, wiping his eyes behind a pair of old glasses. He held the ring Luke had chosen from a local craftsman, simple, silver, and etched with the words, "Our story begins here." No one gave Anna away. No one led her down an aisle, because she had walked herself through heartbreak and job loss, through canceled flights and hostel beds, through foreign towns and lonely mornings, and had arrived here entirely by her own will. The wind stilled as Luke turned to face her. He took her hands, his palms warm, rough from days of quiet effort. He glanced down, took a breath, and looked back into her eyes. "You reminded me that love doesn't always scream," he said, voice steady and low. "It doesn't have to knock down doors or show up with fireworks. Sometimes it just brings you tea without asking. Sometimes it listens, without needing to fix anything. Sometimes it writes about the way you smile when no one's looking. You showed me that love can whisper and still be louder than anything else." Anna's lips trembled with a smile. She squeezed his hands and answered, her voice soft but certain. "You didn't show up with a sword or promises. You didn't try to rescue me. You arrived in silence, with nothing but a notebook and a grief you couldn't name. And that was what saved me. You saw me before I remembered how to see myself. You believed in something again, when I had stopped believing in anything. You didn't just walk into my story, Luke. You wrote the chapter I didn't know I needed." The children rustled around them as the breeze picked up, like nature clapping in approval. Luke slid the ring onto her finger. No spotlight, no crowd holding its breath, just presence, just now. Anna took his hand and did the same. They kissed, and the sound of giggles rippled around them. Someone strummed a guitar, completely out of tune, and it was perfect. One little girl twirled in her two big boots, while another tried to balance a flower on her nose. Anna leaned into Luke as they sat on the edge of the hill after the ceremony, watching the sky darken to a lavender haze. Around them, wild daisies dotted the grass like stars that had fallen to earth. The children danced and sang songs in mixed languages, their laughter echoing off the slopes. There was no towering cake, no seating chart, no bouquet toss. Only this: two people who had wandered far and hurt deeply, sitting side by side with dirt on their boots and rings on their fingers. And it was more than enough. Anna rested her head on Luke's shoulder and whispered, "This is exactly what I never knew I wanted." Luke didn't answer. He just took her hand again and didn't let go. They never went back to the life they once knew. Anna and Luke never moved into a house with trimmed lawns and weekend grocery lists. They never signed up for gym memberships or argued over interior paint. Instead, they packed their lives into two worn backpacks and chose a rhythm that matched the pulse of their hearts. Unrushed, uncharted, undefined. Backpacking together became not just travel, but a way of being. Mornings began with lukewarm coffee at forgotten stations, steam rising like promises in the crisp air. They didn't know where they'd end up that evening, and they liked it that way. Some nights were spent in hammocks tied between palm trees, others in dusty village inns, where roosters served as alarm clocks and ceilings creaked with secrets. They followed kindness, not maps. In Portugal, they helped an old doctor who spoke more to his memories than to people. He missed his granddaughter and didn't know how to use email. Over flaky pastries, Luke helped him log into an account while Anna wrote the first message for him. "Hi, Emily, Grandpa here. I still remember how you laughed at clouds." He cried when he hit send. In a remote village in Georgia, they found a lost boy during a harvest celebration. His small hands trembled until Anna crouched beside him, gently asking his name. Luke spotted a woman in the distance, her eyes wild with fear. Minutes later, mother and son embraced, while Luke and Anna watched silently, hearts swelling in the simplicity of reunion. They did not ask for anything in return, only stories. Anna began writing. At first it was in margins, scraps about the way Luke tilted his head when thinking, or the cadence of laughter they heard from strangers in markets. But on a quiet evening beneath the stars of a Turkish coastline, Luke handed her his old notebook, the one from Interlaken. The pages were weathered, ink smudged in places. She opened it, gently. At the very back he had written, "Finish what I started." So she did. She pieced together his words, added her own memories, gave shape to a love story that had not been planned, but had been deeply lived. She called the book The Boy with the Quiet Eyes, a tribute not just to Luke, but to every quiet love that saves without shouting. It was not written for fame, but stories, when real, find their way. The book traveled faster than they did through word of mouth, backpackers' exchanges, hostel shelves, and therapist waiting rooms. Readers said they saw themselves in those pages, that someone had finally written what love really felt like. When it hit bestseller lists, they were in Vietnam, sharing dumplings on a street corner. A stranger approached them, tears in her eyes, holding a worn copy of the book. She said nothing, just smiled. That was enough. That night, as rain danced lightly on the tin roof above them, Luke reached into his pack. He handed Anna a new notebook, leather-bound, still pristine. "No words yet?" she asked. Luke shook his head. "Your turn to write us." Anna cradled it in her hands, heart thudding. Around her was a world she hadn't planned, a man who had once written about her when she didn't believe in love, and the quiet certainty that this life, unscripted, tender, wild, was her real story. She opened to the first page and began. "This is not a story about finding a person. This is a story about becoming one, and choosing to walk with someone who doesn't lead or follow, but stays beside you when the road disappears." 1 year later, the mountains of Interlaken looked exactly the same. Snow-kissed peaks, the chill of wind sweeping through valleys, and the quiet rhythm of hostel life rolling on. But Anna and Luke were no longer the same people who had once passed through these doors, carrying old wounds and silent hearts. The wooden sign of the hostel creaked in the breeze as they stepped inside, backpacks worn but eyes bright. The lobby still smelled of pine and cinnamon, and the same creaky floorboard near the reception still complained under weight. But something had changed, something gentle and glowing, like the way a place welcomes back those who once called it home. In the common kitchen, the tables were familiar, the mugs mismatched, just like before. A young woman with auburn hair sat curled up in the corner seat, Anna's old favorite spot. She had tear-streaked cheeks and a wrinkled photo of a man clutched in her hand. She did not look up when they entered. Anna paused for a moment, watching the girl. Then she filled a kettle, brewed a simple herbal tea, and carried it across the room. She placed the warm mug gently in front of the girl. The girl finally looked up, startled. Anna smiled, soft but steady. "Sometimes," she said, "the people you're meant to meet find you when you stop looking." The girl blinked. She gave a tiny nod, her hands curling around the mug. Luke stood near the counter, watching Anna. His gaze wasn't full of longing or surprise anymore. It was full of peace, like looking at something precious you already hold. They spent the evening helping out around the hostel. Anna reorganized the bookshelf, laughing softly at how many new copies of The Boy with the Quiet Eyes were there. Luke fixed a broken door hinge and taught a teenage traveler how to sharpen hiking knives safely. That night, the hostel gathered by the fireplace for shared stories, just like they used to. Travelers spoke in half-broken English, and laughter crossed language barriers. Anna sat beside Luke on the rug, her head leaning on his shoulder, her hand in his. Toward the end of the evening, the hostel owner, now gray-haired and always smiling, stood and gestured toward the far wall. "Before anyone leaves," she said warmly, "you should see something we've added." Everyone turned. There, framed in dark cedar, hung an old notebook. The leather was worn, the corners frayed. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "Quiet stories matter. One of them began here." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Anna looked at Luke, stunned. "You didn't?" she whispered. He shook his head. "It wasn't me." The owner walked over to them, eyes kind. "After your book came out," she said, "people kept asking if it was real. So we found the notebook you left and we framed it to remind people that every quiet person in a hostel might be carrying something beautiful." Anna's eyes glistened. She stood slowly and approached the frame. She read the first line, now faded but still legible. "If I ever find the courage to love again, it would be her." Behind her, Luke placed a hand on her back. In that moment, there were no words that needed saying. Later that night, as snow began to fall again outside the window, Anna and Luke sat in the same seats they had occupied a year before, the same little kitchen, the same shared silence. But now, it was full of understanding. Anna held a pen in her hand. A new notebook lay open in front of her. Luke looked at her, his voice low. "Another story?" She nodded. "Yes, but this one starts right where the last one paused." And so, in the same hostel where it all began, with the scent of tea in the air, the hum of soft conversations nearby, and a young girl quietly sipping hope from a ceramic mug, Anna began to write again. Not for the world, not even for the book, but for them, for the love story that did not crash like lightning, but fell like snow, quiet, certain, and real. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you that love often arrives in the quietest ways, then this is just one of many we have for you. At Stories, we believe in the power of tender, soul-stirring tales. Stories of second chances, silent courage, and love that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to Stories for more heartfelt journeys like this one, because sometimes the story you need finds you when you least expect it. See you in the next one.